So, well, that was a thing. The Last of Us, episode 8, I think. Penultimate episode of the season. Pretty sure, if I've been keeping track of this properly. Simple term to say what this one was. It was gross. And as a rule of thumb, I don't like gross episodes of TV. There's a reason that certain episodes really rub me up the wrong way, from things like Game of Thrones, like even some episodes of Black Mirror. Like, that's too much. You've gone beyond what the story needs, and that's just gross. And part of the reason I tend to have that reaction is the vast majority of times I see it deployed. Again, Game of Thrones is a really good example with some of its more gratuitous stuff. Ramsay and Sansa leaps to mind. Is that there was no need for it. It's not just the things that happen. It's that, why did we need to see as much of it as we did? Have it be as clear as it was exactly what was happening? Why did the camera linger? And thankfully, most of that is not really in play here. It's still a gross episode in terms of what we find out about the people that Joel and Ellie have encountered, and just sort of the feel of the episode overall. It's just gross. But probably with more justification than I've seen in a long time. Because my issue with most gross episodes is, okay, I understand maybe why you think that's something that should happen for this story. And I understand establishing that it clearly either did or is about to. But it usually goes too long. We see too much. It is not necessary to depict what you did to get the point across. There was a decent amount of restraint here. Under other circumstances, I might have said you didn't have to layer this many gross things onto the same community and the same guy. But I think there is a reason for it. If I really wanted to, I could still argue that maybe all of it wasn't necessary. But I do understand why all of it is there to the extent that it is. Because this is kind of needed as a countermeasure to the community that Tommy was a part of, which was functional and worked well, and people seemed to care for each other. And this kind of serves as a counterpoint for the way in which, well, actually, let me back up. So the places we've seen up to now that were terrible, the places controlled by Fedra, so that's horrible because of the lingering power structure of the pre-apocalypse world, still holding on to power brutally. We've seen how attempts to overthrow that can still lead to horrible actions, and people choosing to do horrible things. We saw that with Kathleen, if I'm remembering her name correctly. And I suspect we're going to get some of that with the Fireflies as well, in general. But the reason we needed to kind of show how bad this is, Dave, the leader of this place especially, is because those were fairly specific frameworks. Those were, Fedra was the thing in power. The people trying to overthrow them, this would include the Fireflies, who we've seen kind of go too far in some instances. They are specifically fighting that. But then we saw Tommy's community, which was completely detached from that. That was people on their own. And we saw how well people could do on their own. But this serves as a reminder that people on their own, absent the power structures or attempts to overthrow the power structures that are making life miserable, people independent and separate of all of that can still be monsters. And for the world that this thing is set in and is creating, yeah, they actually did need to establish that. And while I think the number of things that are kind of layered onto Dave, specifically when, we got, I'm going to talk in vague terms because, again, it's gross. But when we got a very clear impression of what it was, he wanted to do to Ellie. It did turn my stomach, but in a way that felt like it served a purpose, especially again, having a general sense, reminder, having not played much of the games, of how rough and unforgiving Ellie's going to be as a person later on. An experience like this tracks. Yeah. But it also stopped forcibly a lot sooner than I think something like Game of Thrones in some of its later seasons would have stopped. And boy, was it cathartic that she just kept stabbing him over and over and over. And here was another thing that I appreciated, because people who follow some of my complaints and some of the other places I talk, so like if you listen to the Jumpgate podcast on the Council of Geeks podcast feed, where I go through every episode of Babylon 5 with Jesse Gender, I've brought up there and in some other places my issues with depictions of faith, and in this case it's Christianity, but just faith in general, as depicting it as some deeply inherently awful, disgusting thing. It bothers me. It's a very closed-minded view, and it's very, very, very common in anything science fiction, speculative, which this isn't really sci-fi, but it is speculative. And I tend to dislike it because it disregards, often it seems to disregard, that the problem is not the religion. The religion is just the framework that awful people use to do awful things. And that you could remove religion from places and people would still do comparably awful things, just under a different justification. So I tend to really push back against when I think I'm seeing something that's depicting, look how awful religious people are or religion is. And this doesn't do that. It looked like it was going to. Starting with Dave reading from the Bible and you know, knowing that he considers himself a shepherd to this flock. I'm like, oh God. But I actually think it's a super important detail that he says he did not have faith until after the apocalypse. He is not this way because of religious beliefs. He gravitated to religious beliefs because they fit with how he wanted to move forward with his existence and how he ran this community. He gravitated to them because it was a framework for him to attain and hold power that he wielded horribly against other people. That is the nuance that is so frequently missing from villainous religious characters in a lot of media. So that was well done. I mean, overall, the whole thing is well done. We also get a look at an even nastier side of Joel, a side of Joel that has kind of been hinted at, referenced, but we haven't seen before. And you kind of realize that when Ellie is around, he holds back a little. Not a lot, but a little. Because when the guys who he managed to incapacitate and restrain, when they gave him the information he wanted, if Ellie had been there, I don't know, at least I don't think, he would have just killed them immediately. And at least not in the manner that he did. But he did here, because she's not there. He doesn't have to hold back. If she's not there to see how bad he can be, then he can be as bad as he feels is justified. And he was. This also does the legwork of reminding us that for every random unnamed person that Joel and or Ellie kills, that impacts somebody. That was somebody's friend, brother, father, something. There are consequences. That canon will ripple out. That canon will come back to you. And I know that that's especially a thing in the second game, because they had like a whole thing where the sort of just standard enemies that you fought, you would take them down, and then like their companions would find them and like go no, and like say their names out loud, like as an emphasis to the fact that these are people, and this is the show giving us a little bit of that same thing. Given that I opened saying that this episode is gross, you might be surprised with how much positive I have to say about it. But the thing is, it's gross done well. And while I would never want what we get in this in terms of the depths of people that it shows us, both our main characters and the people around them. I don't want that to become the standard of every episode going forward. There's good reason for it to happen here, and it's well done. If I were to rewatch this season, I'd say there's a 50-50 chance I might skip this episode because it's deeply unpleasant. But it also has a reason to be. And honestly, that alone is just kind of relieving. Because it's when this stuff feels, instead of being necessary for the story, feels just maybe barely justified by the story. Like, well, the story we're telling means we can do this, so let's do this. As opposed to the story that we're telling kind of requires us to do this, at least to some degree. Let's not overdo it, but let's do it. That's what this feels like. But a lot of the worst stuff in Game of Thrones, again, and some other places, a lot of the worst of it feels like, well, we created a world in a setting where we could probably get away with doing this, so let's do it. That's not what this feels like. And that is me just going off of the feel that I have, but it doesn't feel gratuitous in the way that this stuff usually does. And that alone is worth praising. The Last of Us, episode 8. What did you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills and enables me to do this as my living. Even if you can't help me out that way, like, share, subscribe. They also help me out, but don't worry too much about it. We take a relaxed attitude around here, so you can come on back next time you need a break. And now my thanks to my highest supporters on Patreon. Robin Moore, Zubin Lafula, Tarak, the thing that goes doink in the anime, Oliver B., Melinda Walters, Emu Delkey, Leotha Boyd, Becky Sparks, Fernabulax, The Poodle, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Casperl, Tim Price, Adam R.D.L. Taylor, Shayla Gourlay, and Rosalind Bennett. Thanks for your support. And if you want to get your name in the credits, check out the rewards on the Patreon.